Hey guys, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to talk about one of the people who I think might be the biggest suspects in the JonBenét Ramsey case. So as we know in this case, there was a long ransom note, and in that note they mentioned they want $118,000, which is something only a few people would have known. It was on John's pay stub each month, and obviously a pretty private thing. Most people wouldn't know where the wine cellar was, if there was an alarm, if the dog was going to be there, etc. So it seems like it would be an inside job, which is one of the reasons why most people think the family did it, or at least a lot of people, including myself. But the writing on that note doesn't match anyone in the family, including Patsy. So who else knew the house well? Well, of course, there were family members and friends and people who worked in the house. And of all of those people, one person who knew it very well was Linda Hoffman Pugh, who was the housekeeper for about 14 months, up until JonBenet had been killed. So now, do I think she killed JonBenet? No, I don't. And I also don't think she could have fit through that window either. But of course, she obviously had a key, so she wouldn't have needed to go through that window. So I don't think she did it, but she might have pondered this kind of idea because she was hurting for money. Right before there was this murder, she had asked Patsy for $2,000. So maybe it was a family member or someone else, but I think there's some involvement here for the reasons I'll go into. And if you look at some of the ways she acted, like before and after the murder, she said some really awful things about the family. And there could be other reasons why she did that, because she doesn't want to be the main suspect. But maybe she's more nefarious than we might think. So the investigators talked with her and her husband a few times after the murder, and so I'll go through first some of the things I read in like Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, and also Steve Thomas' book to kind of give you an idea of her and her husband's background. So she was born in 1944 in Kansas to a poor family of farmers. Her dad was a big drunk and not doing well, so they ended up moving to Fort Morgan, Colorado, which is basically eastern Colorado, kind of in the flat area. She had 3 brothers and 1 sister. She dropped out of high school and got married at 15 in the early 1960s and had 5 kids. And at that time, she had 10 grandchildren with her first husband. And as you could see from the names here, I wonder what her favorite letter was. A lot of T's there, huh? So her first kids graduated from high school in the late 70s and 80s. So they would be like in their 30s or almost 40s possibly by the time JonBenet was killed. She got divorced with her first husband in 1985 and later got married and had 1 daughter with Mervin Pugh. He was born in the early 40s like her, and he also had 4 kids from a previous marriage. So he also got divorced and later married Linda. So he was from Michigan and Linda was from Colorado. And at some point she lived in Michigan with him and then they came back to Colorado. I don't know the exact timeline there, but I assume Linda's kids were mostly in Colorado and his kids were in Michigan. And back in the day, Mervin had a couple brushes with the law. I didn't see a lot of information about that, but he did write a check with like a fake account. So like a bad check basically to like a gas station, like a mechanic's place for like $14 or something. So back in the early 60s, that was probably worth, I don't know, $100. So kind of some petty crime, but he did have a couple brushes with the law. So let's fast forward to the events leading up to JonBenet's death and Linda's experience working in the house. So she worked with this house cleaning service called Mary Maids. She had a couple other clients at that time and later worked at the Ramsey home. At first, she was just doing 1 day a week, but that was too much because this house, as we know, was enormous. It was like 2 houses put together, basically, just crazy huge. And they had 4 people at one point, and eventually she ended up working 3 days a week for $72 each day. So that's only like $216 a week. And maybe if she had a couple other jobs, she would have made around $400. I think she had a paper route too, so maybe she made a little bit from that. So after a year of working there, she got a $300 bonus, and that was at the end of October 1996. So yeah, she's definitely not making a lot of money. So she said she spent half her time picking up after JonBenet and Burke. she and her brother would just leave everything on the floor, like their socks, their shoes, toys, books, just everything. So they weren't trained to put anything away. She suggested to Patsy to get a hamper at least so they could put their clothes in there, and I don't think she ever did. And she thought that, the problem with the kids is that they were great kids, but they didn't have any responsibility and were spoiled. They weren't really naughty children, but JonBenet sometimes could be a brat. So yeah, there's no doubt that would be annoying. I mean, she's already overweight and in her early 50s and just picking up things all day. So I'm sure at the beginning it wasn't a big deal, but after like a few months or a year, that would definitely be pretty annoying. So one of the ways that Patsy communicated with her were through these handwritten notes all the time, which makes sense because this is before like cell phones and stuff. And I mean, you could call people, but you just write a list of the things you want them to do. And I think a lot of these were left on that spiral staircase, which is where the ransom note would eventually be left later on. So she also talks about Burke's little red scout knife that he was always whittling things. So he was taking like, I don't know, pencils or wood and just cutting this wood and leaving all of these pieces of wood all over the house. Like he wouldn't clean up after himself like everything else. And so she mentioned it to Patsy, and I don't think anything happened. So she finally hid it in like a hallway cupboard, like around like JonBenet's room or something. And that was important because later they actually found that knife in the basement right near JonBenet, like I think around the corner in the boiler room. So she mentioned how she loved being in the pageants, and if she didn't want to go, Patsy didn't make her go to these. So when the Ramseys were traveling, their dog Jacques at first stayed with Linda, but the dog was barking all the time. So it ended up staying across the street with the neighbor, Joe Barnhill. And at first he would take the dog some of the time, and then he got attached to the dog. And so he ended up having the dog basically most of the time. And if JonBenet wanted to see the dog, she'd just go across the street. But I'm pretty sure that dog had been staying with them like either on Christmas Eve or maybe even Christmas, but they had given the dog back to him because they were going to go traveling to, I think, Michigan and then Atlanta after that for like a week or something. But that's important because she would have also known if the dog was around or not. So Patsy started taking a painting class, and JonBenet drew a lot in the area where it was like the butler's kitchen, and sometimes she would take this painting supplies and other things and put them down into the basement. As I mentioned, this was also important because she knew where this tote was down there, and eventually one of these paintbrushes was broken in half and used for this garrote. Patsy also spent a lot of time alone in that house while John was away on business, and she never kept any protection like a baseball bat under her bed or mace, and she never set the alarm because it often went off accidentally, like the kids would come in or something like that, so she just kept the alarm off. So that was other personal information that Linda would have known. So she says in the last month, there was nothing out of the ordinary. They went to New York and came back and were preparing for some pageants, but nothing unusual was going on. She also tells investigators about the bedwetting. And this is a really big deal in the investigation because the police were already looking for some kind of motive, and it's unusual for a 6-year-old to go to the bathroom like that. So they were really trying to pull more information about this, and she might have even been exaggerating. And so this could have been a motive why, possibly Patsy killed her by accident out of frustration, or maybe she was being molested was another theory. That's why she was peeing. But even though it seems like it's weird for a 6-year-old to do that, it actually does happen sometimes. I think there's a small percentage of kids that do that. So on December 23rd, there was a Christmas party, and Linda and her daughter Ariana stuck around to see Santa, who came at 5:30. There was about 8 other couples there, and, just a regular little party for the family and the kids. And she was supposed to come back the next day on the 24th to clean. And she called Patsy and said she couldn't come because she had a fight with her sister, and she needed some money to pay the rent. And she also mentioned later, like, she needed it to pay for some truck parts and also dental work. And so she said she would pay it back each week, like $50 or something. And Patsy said, sure, no problem. She would leave a check on the counter for her the next time she came in to clean on December 27th. So anyway, it's a little unusual that like her sister is her landlord and threatening to kick her out on like around Christmas. So it's a little odd, but weird timing for sure because of course, very late on the 25th is when, JonBenet had apparently been murdered. And so Linda and her husband state the fact that, like, it was really weird that anyone else would have even found that wine cellar because they didn't even know about it. And so she's being a little deceptive in a couple interviews because she did know where that wine cellar was because she was there on Thanksgiving taking the Christmas trees out of that wine cellar. But there's no doubt that it's true. Like, most strangers would not know about that room. So now I'll add just a little bit more about her and her husband. They were interviewed about the murder, obviously. They came in and told her what happened, and obviously Linda, freaked out. She, screamed, and she was actually visibly shaken. And she thought something like that would happen because she was always going out on her own on her bike and roller skating, and, she's this beautiful little kid. And so they had soft tacos for Christmas because her husband, Mervin, had no teeth. He was visibly intoxicated, and the police knew his previous problems with the law back in Michigan. And so at that time, her husband, Mervin, asked, was she missing or dead? And he asked if she died of natural causes or strangulation, which is a little weird because no one knew how she died at that point. So that definitely got the attention of the police. So Mervin had been in the house a few times, but didn't know the Ramseys. And so that might be important because maybe if he had seen them face to face, he would have a more positive impression. But the fact that he never saw them, maybe this could be easier to do something bad to someone like you've never even seen before. So they had been there just less than a month before because while the Ramseys were gone for Thanksgiving, they went in to set up all the Christmas decorations. And at first, they didn't even know where the Christmas trees were. They were looking all around. They finally found the wine cellar room, which is where all of the Christmas trees and decorations were. And so the first day, I think it was just Mervin and their daughter Ariana and Linda who came to do this. And then the next day, her daughter Tina and her son-in-law Mike came to also help. So they were bringing up the Christmas trees, putting up decorations, and they were also cleaning the windows. So it's also interesting because Mervin was actually supposed to fix the window that was broken from the previous summer. John had come home and couldn't get in the front door because he forgot the key. He broke that window and went in. So I'm not sure why Mervin didn't fix it, but he didn't at that time. And so eventually they did get the fingerprints of everyone that were there on Thanksgiving. But they only got Linda's blood samples, her DNA, and hair and writing samples. And so they only had Merv's fingerprints, but they didn't have his writing sample or the other kids. Now, I know the one daughter, Ariana, is 13. I don't think she could be involved, but they probably should have had some writing samples from everyone. And I would have them do the writing sample for her sister as well. And actually, I would have honestly gotten fingerprints and DNA and writing samples from everyone in the family, including Linda's sister and other kids, etc. So they came back for another interview, and they were cooperative, and the investigators asked them for several things, like, do you have any black tape? Mervin came back with 3 rolls. One was unused. They asked for any white line notepads. Linda had one, which was the same as the one in the house, and they had the same Sharpie markers. And she also had a couple keys. But I know the first time that they came, she couldn't find the key, which is kind of interesting because maybe she lent it out, or maybe because she was just so shocked, but she couldn't find it the first interview. And they also found some nylon rope that was wrapped around a stick. And this evidence could be important because there was tape over her mouth, and there was a white cord around her neck, and of course the notepad was the ransom note, so they definitely had similar things in their home. Linda also had mentioned, not to investigators, but I think to Nedra or someone, that she thought JonBenet was so beautiful, you have to worry, she could get kidnapped. And so in the first interviews, in the first, 2 or 3 weeks or so, Linda was really nice. She said Patsy was really warm and kind, a sweet person, but she just needed help in the house and, great person overall. But, she realized pretty soon afterwards that she was one of the main suspects, and her tune changed pretty quick. And she noticed that everyone in town was making a bunch of money off like the photos they took of the family or interviews, etc. And of course, as we know, she's pretty broke. And so eventually National Enquirer offered her $20,000 for like a story. And so she went down to like Fort Lauderdale, was in a limo, just like living it up because $20,000 is like ironically what she probably made in an entire year. So she was definitely enjoying that. And then a few years later, she actually sued the Ramseys family for defamation over the book they wrote. But that was actually thrown out of court. And then she eventually tried to write a book too. But since she testified in that grand jury, legally she wasn't able to, I guess. And so she did write like one chapter though, which was like really salacious and really pretty dark. So in general, to like reporters or investigators or in different writings, she had said how Patsy had a split personality. Her and her husband didn't seem like a happy couple. She wouldn't be surprised if they got a divorce. She additionally went into like their sex life and said that Patsy told her it wasn't good and that the oral sex wasn't good and all this kind of salacious stuff. She said that John had said something about her being a lousy cook and homemaker. And so in that first chapter she wrote, she went into all these details of how Patsy would have gone about murdering her and why she did it, and very detailed. So really kind of dark and in poor taste, unless, of course, she believed it. But I'm sure it was more about the money. And so I doubt Patsy was talking to Linda about that kind of personal stuff. I had just read an interview with Linda Wilcox, who was a previous housekeeper before Linda. And she said she was like furniture in the house while she was working. So like the family just ignored her. Like it was just a business relationship. It wasn't like she was having small talk or like she would be talking about her sex life or something. Now, people who do work in houses might be able to guess certain things, but I doubt she was saying these kinds of things to Linda. And so I can understand Linda doing some of the things she did. Like for one, she didn't have money, right? So not only did she need her personal money, but if she was honestly going to end up being a suspect and she didn't have money, she would be like going against a court with a public defender. I mean, she'd get crushed. So I think that was the main issue, is that she needed to get money. But it's no doubt pretty shitty, some of the things she said, because the police were really eager to get, a lot of this salacious stuff, especially about the bedwetting. And I think it's very possible that she exaggerated a lot of stories and even made up stories just to make herself look better. And, who cares if she's throwing Patsy under the bus, because she needs to save her own ass anyway. So let's go through some of the facts of the case so far and like some of the things that her and her family might have known. So first of all, as I just mentioned, they had duct tape, the nylon cord, the notepads in her home with the markers. Those could have all been used in the crime. They had recently been in the cellar, and she might have even kind of lied about it because she said she didn't even know about it at all, but they definitely got the Christmas trees there. They knew the broken window. They had at least 2 keys to the house. She would have known if she looked at a pay stub how much John's bonus was, which was $118,000, which is the same as a ransom note. They knew the Ramseys were flying out to Michigan. She volunteered meaningful information about JonBenet, like her bedwetting and other things, possibly to shift blame. She knew where the knife was hidden. She knew where the paint tote was. She mentioned how she thought JonBenet might get kidnapped. She knew the back stairs that were used mainly by Patsy. She knew the dog was gone. She knew where JonBenet's room was in relation to the parents' room, and she knew where Burke's room was, and if they could hear anything. If she was caught in the house, she could make an excuse. So she might have known that JonBenet liked pineapple, and she might have suggested that to the intruders to like go in and maybe this will calm her down or whatever. So what do I think happened? So this is just speculation, but I think between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the family was talking and they were coming up with some ideas. And it might have even been before Thanksgiving. So by Christmas, Linda had already been working there for about 14 months. And I'm sure at the beginning it wasn't, that bad of a job, but she might have started to get resentful, knowing how John's bonus was what she made in probably 6 years or so. And I think it's normal for anyone to talk with their friends or colleagues or whatever about their life in general, and work is a big part of that. And I imagine she was complaining about a lot of things, picking up after the kids every day, how, little she was getting paid, maybe some negative things about the family. It would be easy to think of, how jealous she might have been, or maybe even her sister or people she's telling. I mean, you have someone like Patsy who was basically living in a palace. She didn't have to work. She was getting her princess ready for pageants and was probably living the kind of dream most women would love to have. Her husband was making millions of dollars, and it was like a fairy tale, and I'm sure many people could be jealous of that situation. And I'm sure most of the people in Linda's family were struggling just to get by and had worked, their asses off their whole life and didn't have much to show for it in their 50s. And this woman was living in a fairyland, basically. And so we know if she was trying to borrow money, you could just infer that Mervin also needed money. Otherwise, he would have paid for the rent if that was an issue. And why would her sister give her such a hard time about rent unless she was having a hard time too? And I don't know what the financial situation of those kids are. Maybe they were all wealthy doctors, lawyers, and professors, but I could guess they were working class too, or at least some of them. And so maybe they were also having a really hard time. Mervin had a small criminal record and seemed like a drunk. And, there's a possibility that they had one or two bad apples between one of them or both of them. That month, the movie Ransom had come out, which was a movie about kidnapping with Mel Gibson. And the kid in that movie is super docile. And I think they got this idea, like, we could try and kidnap her. This is going to be easy. Like in the movie, she's just going to be quiet. And we're going to get this money easily. So I don't think she would have wanted JonBenet to get molested or killed or anything. But I could see her complaining about these things. And, people's ears kind of perked up and they're listening. And, the alarm's not on. The dog's not there. This guy's bonus is $118,000. And I think people got ideas, even if she wasn't involved. So it's tough to say whether it was just for money or maybe there was part of it that was about revenge. Because the intruder ironically used a lot of things that might have annoyed Linda. Like, for instance, she always wrote these notes around the house and put them, like, on the staircase or wherever. And so now either she or by proxy was writing the note. And now she was in charge and she was giving the instructions for what she wanted done. The paintbrush was broken in the scene. The knife was nearby. A lot of weird stuff. And remember, whoever did this might have not wanted to kill her, obviously. That could have been an accident. And they might have not even wanted to get her out of the house. From what I understand, I'm not 100% sure about this, but that cellar door had like a latch over the front of it. And possibly like a doorknob or something on one side. I think if that latch is down, if someone was inside, they couldn't get out. And so if you had put someone in there and wrapped them up with tape and tied them up, then you could wait for the parents to call you, try to get the money, and instead of transferring the daughter, you risk obviously getting caught by the police. You just tell them, oh, she's in your basement. And then they go down and find her. But I think what happened is that she was squirming, she was screaming, they knew they couldn't control her. She possibly yelled out and they got nervous. They hit her over in the head with a flashlight, maybe even just to knock her out, because they see this kind of thing in movies all the time. They're like, oh, she's just knocked out. And it's like, wait, she's 6 years old. And they, obviously killed her by accident. So it's possible Linda and, some family members or friends had kind of pondered this idea. And at the last minute, Linda got cold feet. And possibly that's the fight she had with her sister that day before Christmas, basically, when she was supposed to go to work. She had said that she didn't want to go through with it, and, her family members or whoever complained, and they said, we need the money, we got to do this, and she's like, no, I don't want to do it. I'm just going to ask for a loan. I'm going to be in debt. This is going to take a long time to pay off, but I'm not going to go through with this. But their mind was already made up. They already had the information they needed, and they also needed a lot of money. I mean, even if you split $118,000 by like 3-4 people, that was probably what they'd make each in like 1 or 2 years. So I can imagine someone like, in theory, her sister or a female did write it, and then one of their like boyfriends or maybe 2 friends actually carried out the act. And their DNA wouldn't match with Linda anyway because they're not a blood relative. So even if they have Linda's DNA in the system and they test that, there won't be a match. One of these guys could be like Michael Helgoth. This guy was one of the big suspects. He was like one of these weirdo dudes who was like breaking into people's homes, super sketchy. And at one point, the DA, Alex Hunter, mentioned that he had big news the next day, which meant that he might say that he has a suspect, which he actually didn't. And Michael Helgoth was killed. And people said it was a suicide, but it was like the weirdest way to kill yourself, like your arm across your body and over through the side. So people think that someone killed him, and whoever was with him was the other perpetrator. So it's too bad that this case got such international attention, because the police weren't good to begin with, but they had just such a wide net to throw out there and so many people to interview that, you know, if it was like a really small case in a smaller house and this situation happened, they would have really gone through the maid's contacts more and I think might have found something. But Linda had also helped the police anyway because she got a lot of dirt on the Ramsey family, and so they never really seemed to look that much. Now, I see online there's some information that Steve Thomas mentioned. He's like, oh, we investigated the extended family a bit, and there's nothing there, but they should have gotten writing samples and some DNA for sure. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Linda Hoffman Pugh and some potential things to look into in the future. Maybe I'll do some other videos on some of the other main suspects. I think next I'll do a JFK video. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.